What's up, everybody? Welcome in to the 615. It's your host, Lee Hillis, and you see we are talking defensive line, and our guest knows a lot about draft coverage, and that is the producer of Titans Radio, Rhett Bryan. And we'll be back with Rhett Bryan here in about 30 seconds. What's up, everybody? Welcome back. Let's go ahead and bring our guest in here, Rhett Bryan, the producer of Titans Radio. Rhett, how are you?
I'm great, Lee. How's it going?
This took a little bit to get done.
Okay.
Of course, you hear me. I'm over here recovering from being sick this last week. But the big thing is defensive line. There are some holes on this defensive line.
Yes.
So let's go and jump into this. The back end, I went dark horse. 10, I went Tyler Davis out of Clemson. Could be a viable option if he's there late day 2, early day 3.
Mm-hmm.
A guy that has visited Tennessee already, and Darius Robinson out of Missouri, which Rhett, I know you mentioned you liked him as a player.
Yeah, and I'll tell you why. I don't want to wreck your form here when you're going through this, but I will tell you, Darius Robinson, when you talk about him being able to play inside and outside of the line, he has a player comp very similar to a guy that just left the Houston Texans after having a very good 3-year career here in Danico Autry. He's a lot like that. Big, long, disruptive, made a lot of plays in the Southeastern Conference at Missouri, and that is certainly a guy that I like, and I'm glad that the Titans have had a visit with him.
And then, of course, another guy out of the SEC, Mason Smith, could be another viable option.
Indeed.
Michael Hall out of Ohio State and Byron Murphy out of Texas. And Byron Murphy is not the only guy from the University of Texas in my list.
Sure.
So, Red, some other guys that I don't have on here, who would you have on here that I don't have on the back end?
On the back end, if we're talking about interior defensive line, I would be going McKinley Jackson from Texas A&M, 6'2", 326 pounds. Again, SEC type resume there. And I'll tell you another one that you should look at is Dwayne Carter from Duke. Dwayne Carter, 3-year starter, I believe, 3-year captain, like ultimate team leader kind of guy. And
for Mike Elko.
Do what now?
For Mike Elko there at Duke, when he was there at Duke.
That's right. And
now the head man in College Station.
That's right. That's exactly right. And the thing about Dwayne Carter, I think, is what teams view him as positionally, because he played all along that defensive front for the Duke Blue Devils. Smart player, and just somebody I think can be a value pick in the later rounds. Probably see him in round 3 or 4, maybe even later on in day 3, but he's going to make somebody a nice player that you don't have to spend a lot of capital on.
Well, I'm going to let you take this at number 5. Where would you go right there as your number 5 guy?
Number 5 probably be, and you've got Byron Murphy at 6. And yeah. Byron Murphy is probably one of the top interior defensive linemen in this draft. And here's the thing, Lee, when we're talking about interior guys, not edge pass rushers, there's a shortage of those. And that's evidenced by the contracts that's recently been had by Jeffrey Simmons, Chris Jones with the Kansas City Chiefs. We saw what Derek Hall's money looked like just a few days ago for the Carolina Panthers. And so once that first couple of tiers come off of there, the talent kind of drops off a notch or two. Byron Murphy's one of the better interior guys in this draft. But at number 5, looking at who you had from 6 through 10, I've got to go with a guy that I just absolutely fell in love with at the Senior Bowl, and that's Braden Fisk from Florida State University. You're talking about a guy who just absolutely made the best of a transfer opportunity. He was a Western Michigan Bronco, just like Corey Davis, the former receiver for the Titans.
Yeah.
And transferred to Florida State University and really, really made lots of plays. Now, I know that line also has Jared Verse on it, and we're going to discuss him. But Braden Fisk is just the kind of guy that, first of all, I loved his attitude. He said, I'm not the biggest guy. I'm not the fastest guy. I'm not the longest guy. But he tested well at the combine. He had a 4.72 40 vert. All of those things, they were all good. And when you look at what he did in their incredible season going 13-0, you started to see down the stretch what he might look like at the next level. You look at that ACC championship game against Louisville. I think he had 4.5 tackles for loss, 9 or 9.5 tackles. I want to say 3 or 3.5 quarterback sacks. He was a wrecking crew in there. Fantastic person, fantastic. Plays with a high motor. He's a guy that could help you. I really like Braden Fisk.
Well, how funny is it that you and I went the same place?
There we go.
Braden Fisk.
4.78
out of Florida State.
292. How about that? 33
That is
vertical.
Yeah.
26 reps at 225. But yeah, and there you go. Shows some stiffness in the hips, struggles with ideal pad level, lacks ideal lower body strength. A couple of those things, the pad level and the lower body strength, you can get into an NFL program and probably help a couple of those things. The stiffness in the hips, you can't coach that. That just is what it is. But you'll never question his desire. You're talking about a guy that loves football. And that's the thing that is an overriding topic throughout this time of the year as it pertains to.
You can see that. You can see that in his tape, that he loves the game.
Absolutely. And that's the overriding thought as we go through this Titans offseason. One of the first things Rand Carthon told Titans Radio down the stretch of the season when it wasn't going well is when it comes time to flip the switch towards the draft, football character is one of the top things on the list, if not the top thing. In other words, how much do you love football? He says, how much do you love ball? This guy, Braden Fisk, he loves ball.
Yes. And you can tell by the way he plays.
Coach Mack, when we interviewed him at the Senior Bowl, he goes, Rhett, you know who he reminds me of? He said, Carl Klug. He's a Carl Klug. That's what he is. I'm like, okay,
now that
I can see that.
Yeah. Oh, and he's explosive.
Yeah.
And I think that's something you hit on, was that he was extremely explosive. Oh, his skill set is head and shoulders above the others, in my mind. Some of the other guys.
Sure. No, he's somebody that's going to be.
I think he'll be probably a midday 2 guy.
Absolutely.
If not a late day 1, an early to midday 2.
Yeah, he's early to midday 2.
Unless someone like Kansas City falls in love with him.
Depends on what they're wanting to do. Depends on whether they want to go defensive or they want to go to offense at 32, because I got a couple other ideas about that, and it's not on this side of the ball. But 4.78 40, 33.5-inch vert. Here's the other thing. I'd have to go back and look and see what his 3-cone drill time is, but now this is really more for edge pass rushers, but for defensive linemen, it could probably be somewhat applicable. But a good threshold that you know that there's some explosion and power there, especially in edge pass rushers, if you have a 3-cone drill of 7.2 seconds or less, and if you have a broad jump, and if you have a broad jump of 9 feet 9 inches or greater, and where is he? He has a 9.9 broad jump. So I'd have to go back and look at the 3-cone, but those are good levels to look at. And sure, there's outliers and anomalies in this, but that's a good rule of thumb this day and age.
But then number 4, I went Leonard Taylor III out of Miami.
Sure.
Big 6'4", 303-pound defensive lineman.
And look at that wing, 80 and 5/8 inches, long prospect, 33 and 7/8 inch arms. Okay, 3-cone drill, whatever, but that's not what you're asking him to do. You're asking him to go in there and collapse the pocket in the middle, which is how the NFL is affecting quarterbacks nowadays. That is how someone like Patrick Mahomes and
Lamar
are being affected. That's why there's such a premium on the Chris Jones of the world and the, all
Jeffrey
of these
Simmons.
guys, like Jeffrey Simmons, is somebody who can stop a gap, run wise, but can collapse the middle of the pocket. This guy does those kinds of things.
This guy can be effective wherever you put him at, inside, even on the edge, possibly.
Yeah. And look, a 3-cone drill at 7.81 doesn't necessarily lend to that, but the motor and the want to and all of those things and the schemes, those are the variables in this. But yeah, I like this choice at 4.
Where would you go at 4 right here?
Let's see here. I'll give you one. And this guy, I don't know if you've got him inside your top 4, but this guy I think there's a lot of people are starting to catch on to this guy. And this was a guy that we started noticing at the Senior Bowl is Rook Ororo, who played at Clemson. He's one of these guys that there's all these kids who come from Africa as young guys and migrate to the country, and they're normally soccer people by trade. They love, look, that type of football, as they call it, rules the world. North American football, the NFL or that pigskin style football rules North America. But they come here and they've got some get around to them because they've been kicking a soccer ball since they were little bitty guys. This is a little raw prospect, but I think he's going to make somebody a really nice player. He's got really good physical traits, and get him in a big time weight room. Not that Clemson doesn't have those things, but a real training and learning how to be a pro type approach to it. Rook Ororo is somebody I would keep my eye on.
And then what about 3?
3. Why don't you show me who you've got at 3? How about that?
I went
Brandon Dorlus. Yeah, okay. 4.85 in the 40, and that's 6'3", 283, and ran a 4.85. 30.5 vert. 3-cone 7.43, long arms, big wing. Yeah, absolutely. The ankle flexion is there. Yeah. No, I like that. I'm interested to see you have in your top 2, because I think there's one guy here when we're talking about the inside of the line that is going to and he would have been a first rounder, but there's a foot going on with this guy, and he had it medically repaired, and so he hasn't been able to do any workouts. But let's go to the top of the list and see who you've got. Let's see who out of it 2 and 1. I'm curious.
Number 2 is a guy that me and you had actually talked about,
Tavondre Sweat, who is actually in on a visit to the Tennessee Titans and made the headlines for a reason you don't really want to. Yeah. That probably don't want to do that. This is also another guy, when you see him up close and in person, and as we did at the Senior Bowl in Mobile, it's a massive human being, 6'5", 366, and still runs a 5. Oh, Lord. Yeah, he's an enormous human being. But he still ran a 5.27 40 at 366. He still has, a 26-inch vert. I mean, good Lord. I mean, you saw what he and Byron Murphy were able to do for the
Yes.
Longhorns in their time together. And this is a different guy. You know, Byron Murphy's a smaller guy in stature and in weight. But this is your classic shade or nose. I mean, this guy's just he's a space eater. He's what you
put him right there with Jeff and
oh,
Sebastian
good gracious.
Day.
Oh yeah. That's just fine by me. I mean, you know, with the hope that he turns into being some of the all-time space eaters that you've seen in the last several years
like
in the league. Tier Tart is good. This guy's better than Tier Tart. This guy's got a better resume coming out. Tier Tart's somebody that had to develop in this. This guy, if you get him in the right stuff, he can help you pretty much right off the bat.
And number one is a name you mentioned back when we were talking, like when we were coming to my top 5.
Okay.
Who you would have right there in between 6 and 10.
Yeah.
McKinley
Jackson. You have him as number 1. How about that? All right, here we go. 6'2", 326, and still ran 5.26 40. Still 23 vert, 24 reps at 225. Do you know how hard it is, Lee, to do 24 reps at 225 when you've got nearly 34-inch arms? That's a short arm man's game, is what that is.
That's like
there's power there.
That's like having someone like a left guard.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, that's right. No, but this guy. Okay, so you've got McKinley Jackson at number 1. How about that? Well, perceived lack of ideal NFL height and arm length. Well, I think the arm length's fine,
but it's the 6'2".
Yeah, the height
that can cause some problems.
Sure.
But I've watched him in person the last 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
He will give a team a nice addition on a defensive line.
He and I don't know if he's a top 30 visit of the Titans or not.
He has.
Okay. I haven't kept up with all of that. We're just a little over 2 weeks out, and I haven't kept my final note for those things, but
he's on their list. I think he visited within the last couple of weeks.
Okay.
And I think this is a guy that people are somewhat high on.
Sure.
And if people would try to say I'm crazy for this, I would trade back in the second and try to get a third and go. And I'm going to get your thoughts on this also.
Okay.
You go in the second or the first round. Go wide receiver at 7. And the guy that I'm thinking, the Titans have had somewhat success taking speedy guys. Just go back, I want to say 2008, that 2006, 2008 range, with a speedy little running back in CJ2K.
Mm-hmm.
Out of a small school. You probably know right where I'm going with this. Go take the fastest wide receiver off the board at 7 and Xavier Worthy. Pair him with Calvin Ridley and DeAndre Hopkins.
Here's the thing about Xavier Worthy, and I get where you're going. Now, before I say what I'm going to say, who do you have at 38? Are you going tackled at 38?
Yes. I'm looking at either Jordan Morgan out of Arizona,
okay. Yeah,
or Patrick Paul out of Houston.
Okay. All right. Now, here's the thing about Xavier Worthy. He's 165 pounds. That's 10 pounds less than Smith, the receiver up in Philly, the former Alabama Heisman Trophy winner, Deontay Smith.
Yeah.
And so I'm worried about durability. That's the only thing. Like, he's as fast as Grease Lightning. I mean, there's no question. He ran, 4.21 or whatever it was.
Yeah, 4.21 at the combine.
If I'm going receiver at 7, and I'm going to wait on
You're
tackle at 38.
You're probably looking at a guy like Malik Neighbors, maybe,
Yeah.
who's actually visiting the Titans today.
Yeah.
Also.
That's who's probably there, because
Or
it's
grab a guy
looking.
or go tackle at 7 and get a guy like a J.C. Latham if Alt and Fashanu are off board.
So, okay. So Neighbors is what I'm thinking, because here's what this draft is shaping up to be with the way that NFL teams perceive J.J. McCarthy. We may have the first draft in the history of the NFL draft where there's 4 consecutive quarterbacks taken to start a draft. It's never happened before. There's been three different times, but never 4. I think it could very well shape up to do that. Now you're talking about wide receiver after that point. And that also means somebody's trading out of the top 4, which, I think everybody is guessing that the Minnesota Vikings are the ones that's going to be trading up because they got that extra pick from Houston at 23. So they have 11 at 23. Anyway, so that means somebody's going after Rome Odunze, somebody's going after Marvin Harrison Jr. And again, it's beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Who do you like? But that could leave Malik Neighbors right there. And Malik Neighbors, I mean, I wouldn't hate it if they took him. I'd rather them take tackle, because God knows the offensive line needs help. And whoever it is, whether it's Will Levis or whoever it is, you've got to shore up the tackle spot at the left tackle. But let's just say something crazy, like, Alt isn't there, and that's the guy you really wanted, and you can't find a trade partner. So, and maybe Fashanu's not who you want. Maybe, so maybe you can't find a trade partner. Malik Neighbors wouldn't be the worst pick in the world. I mean, you're talking about a guy that tested, and if you go look at it, and you'd have to find it from his pro day because he didn't work out at the combine, test numbers wise. But Malik Neighbors has a lot of testing numbers very similar to Jamar Chase. I mean, you're talking about a guy that's 6'3", and, at his pro day, I think ran a 4.31, had a 40+ inch vert. I mean, like, ridiculous stuff. I don't know that he's the best receiver in this draft, because, there's arguments about, I think in any year, let me say this, in any year that there's no Marvin Harrison and Rome Odunze, he probably is the best receiver in the draft. Marvin Harrison is probably the guy. But Rome Odunze is so good too. Rome Odunze is a guy that's going to help somebody immediately. And that's the difference between he and Malik Neighbors, because Rome Odunze he's a more polished route runner, more depth in a route tree. He's lined up everywhere in the world on that Washington Huskies offense. But yeah, I could see something like that. Now, the scenario I like is this. Let's say nobody calls with anything that you just fall in love with, because the top 4 quarterbacks are gone.
Yeah.
So Joe Alt is still the pick I would take at 7, just because whether it is Will Levis or not, and he's got at least this year to prove he's the guy, you've got to protect whoever it is going forward, whether it's Will Levis or whether it's someone else. And Joe Alt is the most polished tackle there is in this thing. He's a plug him next to Peter Skoronski and let him go. Yeah. So if you take him at 7, what wouldn't be terrible? And I don't know that he lasts till this point, but Ladd McConkey at 38 wouldn't be bad.
Out of Georgia.
Would not be bad at all. He could go into the bottom of the first round and you wouldn't even have a chance to get him. He is I believe he is the Puka Nacua of this draft in terms of let him go. And from a much bigger program and a bigger resume than Puka Nacua had, obviously, because he was drafted so much later. It was a 6th rounder or whatever. And if he is gone, then I certainly would love to take a Darius Robinson that we've discussed here from Missouri at 38, because he is a guy that you can plug in all around that defensive line and has a skill set a lot like a Danico Autry, who you just lost. And then
the question is, if Sweat there, do you take if Sweat is there at 38, do you jump on him?
I don't know. Film at 11 on that one. because it depends on what team's perceived value is of him now that he has a DWI. Like, I'm not minimizing what he did, but it's not the end of the world what he did.
Yeah.
And some teams will view that differently than others, but it's a red flag that he's given them, and he's hurt himself in the process. So does he slip to the third round, the fourth round? I don't know. At some point, somebody's going to take a flyer on him because it's just going to be too good to pass up. How far does he fall? I don't know. We'll know in a couple of weeks for sure. Yeah. So with my scenario, I've got Alt at 7. I've got Lad McConkey and or Darius Robinson at 38. So if it's Robinson because McConkey is gone, there's a guy I'm fascinated with that you could get in the 4th round because you don't have a 3, or maybe even the 5th. There's a receiver who had a stellar year at Virginia named Malik Washington, who was he was a transfer from Northwestern. He is a smaller guy. He's 5'8.5". He's 192 pounds. But if you watch how he plays and you look at his testing numbers and you look, except for the stature part, he will remind you somewhat of Steve Smith. And because this guy plays like a running back, his yards after catch are good because he's a physical runner. In fact, I think, carried the ball a few times as a Northwestern Wildcat. But there are receivers littered throughout this thing that can help you. Depends on what shape, size, and position you want. And that's just one example.
And speaking of a guy like a Malik Washington, dealing with the height, stature, and all that, what about a guy like Anaya Smith out of Texas A&M?
Don't hate it. He's probably a day 3 guy. Saw him at the Senior Bowl. Very capable, and he's a smaller, built like a fire plug kind of guy.
He's, I think, like 5'9".
Yeah. No, I wouldn't hate that at all. No, I like that.
I was laying here. I was sitting back last night watching the state game again because I was there at the state game.
Okay.
There was this little like tunnel screen underneath, and he took it 15, 20 yards to the house.
Sure.
Up the middle, untouched.
Yeah.
I'm like, man, if Tennessee could get their hands on him and use him as a return man.
Yeah.
And if that does happen, let's just say Tennessee does take him in day 3.
Okay.
Does that make Kyle Phillips expendable to an extent?
I mean, anything's possible. Sure. I mean, every year somebody's coming in to take your job, and Kyle Phillips knows that for sure.
Yeah.
And that you just said something that struck a chord with me, going back to my initial thought about Malik Neighbors at 7, possibly. Malik Neighbors may be the most explosive wide receiver in this draft.
Yeah.
With what you said about Anaya Smith, this guy can take a 2-yard catch and take it to the house 80 yards. He's that kind of I mean, and so one of the hardest things to come up with as an offense in the National Football League is manufacturing explosive plays of 20 yards or longer. First of all, Malik Neighbors had more X plays of 20 yards or more than any player in FBS last year.
Wow.
And so if you had a guy that can help you create those, he becomes a very valuable thing. That's why I mentioned somebody like him. Now, going back to our original topic here of defensive linemen, who I would have at number 1 is a guy who, if he was healthy, would be very much talked about right now. He had a foot injury through a chunk of his season at Illinois, and I believe it was a Jones fracture of the 5th metatarsal on his right foot, if I'm not mistaken.
Can I just guess who it is?
Go ahead.
Newton?
Yep. Jerzon Johnny Newton. 6'2", 300 pounds. He's a wrecking machine. And I'll say this, and I'll speak for Coach Mack. When we started looking and talking about this guy, he said, you know what he reminds me of? I'm not saying he's this guy, but he said his makeup and the way his body is built and the way he kind of plays reminds me a lot of Aaron Donald.
And speaking of Aaron Donald just retired this year.
Yes, indeed. But Johnny Newton, still going to be pretty high draft pick. I just don't think it'll be in night one. I think
it'll probably be the start of night 2.
Yeah, could be. And look, there are a handful of players in this that have to have the medical clearance to consider where they're going to end up being drafted. Again, talking about guys getting to the quarterback or defensive lineman, Laiatu Latu from UCLA, the defensive end from UCLA, is one of the prime examples of that. You're talking about a 6'5", 260-pound guy who was medically retired. He played at the University of Washington, had a very severe neck injury as a result of an injury, I think, in a spring practice. He missed 2 years of football. And NCAA said, you're not playing. But turns out one of his position coaches ends up going to UCLA and says, hey, we got to get you right. I think if we can get you surgery and get you right, we can get you back on the football field. And sure enough, he entered the transfer portal and was able to head to UCLA and had a great 2023. I think he was the Ted Hendricks Award winner for the best defensive lineman in the league in college football. There's a couple of the other awards he got. Lots of tackles for loss. I think 13.5 sacks, something like that. If those medical checks are okay, somebody's going to draft this guy pretty high. In fact, he'll be a night 1 first round draft pick. And if he didn't have the medicals, he'd probably be much higher than that. Now, the question remains is how sure is your medical staff or confident and what kind of window he will have? Because there's a prime example of a guy that just retired who had the same kinds of issues coming out of college football, and that's Leighton Vander Esch of the Dallas Cowboys, who played, 5-6 years, and he's now he retired. He walked away as a pretty young man. But Laiatu Latu, as Coach Mack would say, he's not an empty chair. There's some explosion there. He's another guy from the Senior Bowl. We have Dallas Turner as the top edge pass rusher on our board. When you look at his body of work, especially last year, and at 6'3", 247, I think he had a 42.5-inch or 40.5-inch vertical. I mean, the explosion's off the charts. With those measurables I was talking about, with a broad of 9.9 and a vert or a 3-cone of 7.20. Don't have a 3-cone on him, but his broad was 10.7. His vert was 40.5, 4.46 in the 40. And we've got him as the top edge pass rusher. A guy that is also an edge pass rusher of value in night 2 and could slip a little further, but I think night 2 is his teammate Chris Braswell from Alabama. Braswell, I think, got overshadowed by Dallas Turner.
Yeah.
And unlike Dallas Turner, like both of these guys didn't see the playing field as much as they probably wanted to or should have when Will Anderson was there. But with Turner on the other side, Braswell had some nice numbers. I want to say he had 8.5 sacks himself. That's a guy that you should keep an eye on. But yeah, there's some good edge pass rushers in this draft, and you won't see a ton of them taken in night 1. Turner is one of them. Laiatu Latu is another. I think the rest of it's going to be night 2 and beyond. But there's defensive help. There is defensive help. Now, when we're talking interior defensive linemen, after the first couple of tiers or pods, it drops off pretty significantly because then you start talking about developmental prospects.
Yeah.
Or guys that are just going to be, somebody that's a rotational positional player that helps you out. And obviously the later you get, you're talking about, preferred free agents. Squad. Yeah, exactly.
Practice squad, special teams guys.
Yep.
But as we get ready to get out of here, Rhett, thank you for stopping in and talking defensive line.
Glad to do it. Looking forward to the NFL draft. It is one of my favorite times of the year. I say it all the time. I like this part of the year almost more than the regular season, just because this is how everything's built, and just to see people
free agency and the draft.
Oh God, but the draft is truly how somebody's built.
Yes,
if you do it right, you can make a run at things. And the thing I'm always fascinated by is just the human interest stories. As guys are coming out of college, because there's some really incredible stories of what guys have been through.
Well, as I always say, stay classy and tighten up.